President.
Senator from New Jersey.
Mr. President, I join my colleagues on the floor, and I want to salute both Senator Nelson and Senator Blumenthal, who represent states whose citizens have felt the scourge of gun violence. In Newtown and Parkland and the Pulse nightclub. I don't know how many more Parklands we need, but I certainly know that my colleague from Utah, who only read part about what alarms him, that it shall not be possible to publish what? To publish the ability to create a gun that is undetectable and untraceable. Why are we spending billions as we go through the airports of our country to ultimately secure ourselves? We saw it after September 11th. And now we're going to undermine all of those billions and all of those securities by allowing anyone here or in the world to get access to the IP address that you downloaded, and all of a sudden you can create a three-dimensional plastic gun that is as deadly as any other gun. And what draws us to the floor to ask the unusual effort of unanimous consent to ultimately bring this legislation to the floor is the failure of the administration in the first place not to allow this to happen. We don't need legislation if the president turns back the decisions of his Secretary of State and others in his administration and says, hey, wait, this is not in our national security interest. It is not in the national interests of the United States to allow our citizens to be exposed to an undetectable, untraceable gun as deadly as any other. It's not in the national interest and security of the United States to have our soldiers halfway around the world have terrorists have access to a new design that will be cheaper for them and at the end of the day will allow them to attack our soldiers. It is unconscionable. But since the administration doesn't seem to be acting, if anything, they've acted the opposite way, that's why we come to the floor. If the government has any specific role that rises above all other, it's to protect its citizens. That's what we're trying to do here. It should be a bipartisan request. And what's so difficult about the legislation? Nothing much. One of the two pieces of legislation simply says you cannot permit an IP address to be published on the internet because then globally anybody can get that downloaded and create a gun. That's the simple part of that. The other one is that any gun has to be traceable and identifiable and therefore has to have a number on it. Even when our colleagues who are the most ardent advocates of the Second Amendment say they don't want to keep guns out of the hands of criminals, well, how do you keep a gun out of the hand of a criminal who doesn't have it detectable and isn't traceable? It's pretty amazing. Now, I've been in the Congress 26 years between the House and the Senate. This is one of the most amazing moments for me. Look, this country has a gun violence problem. It has a mass shooting problem. But do-it-yourself downloadable guns will supercharge this crisis, leading to more senseless tragedies. It's already too easy for criminals and extremists and terrorists to get their hands on a gun. And now we're going to add a new concern, terrorists packing the plans for new plastic printable firearms. Look, I don't care if a gun is made out of metal, if it's made out of plastic, if it can fire a bullet and take someone's life, then it should be regulated. It's beyond irresponsible for the Trump administration to roll over and allow a self-described anarchist to post directions for do-it-yourself guns on a website available to anyone with an internet connection. That's what we're saying here. Already, according to some news reports, the blueprints from an AR-15, the weapon used in the massacre at Parkland, were downloaded more than 2,500 times. That's 2,500 unknown individuals in an unregulated space. Now, as the ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, I was appalled to find out that the State Department carried this out without notifying Congress. Last Wednesday, the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, was before our committee, and he looked us in the eye, said he was unaware of the issue and that he would look into it. That was a Wednesday. On Friday, the State Department had suspended arms export regulations specifically to allow these 3D gun blueprints to be posted on the internet. Well, so much for looking into it. This was a case that was proceeding to the courts where the government had won at every round. And in this morning's tweet, the president made it pretty clear that instead of listening to the concerns of the American people when he has a gun question, which I would submit is not even a question of a gun question, it's a national security question, he listens to the NRA. Now, the NRA may be concerned in this particular case. Why? Because plastic guns don't get built by gun manufacturers and dealers that they represent and fund their causes. The posting of a 3D gun shows just how dangerous the Trump administration's regulatory effort to loosen export controls on firearms, including assault-style rifles and even sniper rifles, actually is to the safety of Americans at home, abroad, and innocent civilians across the globe. All you have to do is go to this company's website to see it for yourself. They're proclaiming, quote, "The era of the downloadable gun is here." That's what they say on their website. The era of the downloadable gun is here. Well, we should make sure that that era doesn't happen. These are two simple but powerful, common sense pieces of legislation that can protect us. I call upon the president to stop it dead in its tracks so we don't have to wait for the legislation. But if not, we call upon this institution to protect the American people. And I hope my colleague will consider coming back later in the day and making another unanimous consent request so that we can actually protect the American people against the ability of anyone with a 3D printer to go ahead, create a gun that can kill a human being, and ultimately defy all of our security procedures at airports and elsewhere, and let any terrorist in the world who wishes us harm to do it and manufacture it in quantity. That's pretty outrageous. That's what we're talking about. I hope the administration will see the light and change the course. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.